So today we're here at Templar Wines, joined by Max Pratchett, who is the director, owner, chief dog's body, whatever he wants to describe himself. And we're on location. So we're actually come out of the studio. We're actually on location in Max's premises, where we'll be talking about wine and how his business has run and come from. So if you hear noises going around, that's because this is a live workplace and work is still carrying on, even though we're talking about what we would consider to be really important issues, such as running a business. So Max, over to you.
Well, thanks, Martin, for that introduction. I've been running Templar Wines for 15 years, and please say, working with Martin probably for the last 11 or 12.
Yeah.
So a little bit of history there.
So Max, thank you for joining me today on the inaugural podcast. It's the first time. It's all a bit scary. But let's get straight into it. So the big question, as I have phrased it, what's keeping you up at night from a business point of view?
Well, there's quite a few things that, as a business owner, that keep you up at night. Some of them are short-term issues that generally just go away, and the ones that you just need to sleep on sometimes, some of the issues, and they do go away with a bit of perseverance. I suppose the biggest one at the moment is the pending duty rise, and the impact that's going to have effect on my customers rather than myself. I deal with restaurant sectors, and the duty rise that's pending on the 1st of August will mean quite a lot of differences to the way that they price their wine moving forward.
And that's because they've changed the way in which they're doing it, haven't it? It's no longer a flat percentage based on the wine. Broadly,
there's 5 rates of duty on wine at the moment. And most of those, what most wines we drink, fall into 2 rates of duty. The normal still wine duty is currently £2.23 a bottle, and the current sparkling duty is £2.87 a bottle. And that's all going to be revised on the 1st of August.
And what will that revision be? Do we know that yet? Or is it still the devil in the detail and they'll let us know at some point?
Well, we know what it's going to end up looking like in February 2025, but on the 1st of August there's going to be an interim measure where it's going to come into force, and what that means is that every 0.5% ABV difference will attract a different duty rate. So we'll go from ultimately 5 different tiers of duty management to probably 25 or 30 different tiers, because every single 0.5% will attract a different duty rate. From the 1st of August, the break that the government have allowed is that all wines that are between 11.5% and 14.5% will attract the same rate of duty.
Okay.
And equally, the sparkling wine will attract basically one rate of duty, unless it's particularly weak in ABV.
Okay. So from your point of view, in trying to manage not only how you can buy that on behalf of your customers, because ultimately you're trying to pick the best wines for your customer, it obviously then creates much more pressure on you, because obviously the lead times, or some of the lead times in buying wine, are 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, I suppose we're sat on at the moment about 8,500 cases of wine just in our bonded warehouse. And at the time I bought all that wine, it was at the old rate of duty.
Yeah.
So I was expecting a certain amount of duty to be paid. Moving forward, every bottle of wine that I pull out of bond after the 1st of August will attract the new rate of duty.
And then you've got to manage that process, identify, well, Bond will help you with that, won't they? So
I'm hoping Bond will do it all.
So Bond, so effectively a bonded warehouse is an area which is customs protected.
Correct.
So effectively it's where you can put wine and they will store it on your behalf, and then the management of the duty side of that is handled by them, because ultimately you only pay the duty when you remove it from the bonded warehouse. That's the whole point of having that mechanism in place, that also helps you with storage, ultimately.
It does. It's a space issue, but it's also a cash flow issue. As soon as the wine comes out of bond, in fact, the alternative is as soon as the wine comes into the country, if it was on its way just to me, I'd pay the duty as it crossed the border. Whereas, for example, if I bought a year's worth of Chablis, I just pay for the juice, and as I draw the wine out of bond, I pay the duty as I go. So it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's just about that management process, isn't it? And it's the management process not only from your cash flow, your space, but it also helps the customer. Because from your point of view, you can then at least say to them, look, I have that wine. It's available for you to draw down upon over the course of 3-4 months, rather than getting to a point where you go, right, hold on a minute. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things that happened with Brexit initially was that we now hold higher levels of stock of everything. It's a little bit more difficult to get wine into the country, so the lead times are a little bit longer. So we hold a little bit more stock. And on the fast-moving lines, we hold a lot of stock because we live in a tourist holiday area. When the sun shines, we sell an awful lot of wine. And one minute you think you've got a lot of wine and the sun shines for a month and you're there going, where did that go?
Yeah, and we're very fortunate, aren't we, that we are blessed with beaches, coast, lovely places to go and drink wine when the sun's out. And people flock to those places and buy certain types of wine.
No, exactly. In the last 4 weeks, we've had lovely weather, and it's no surprise we've sold a lot of wine, a lot of rosé, a lot of white wine, a lot of bubbly wine.
Yeah, because those are the sort of wines that people will want at this time of year.
My mix can go as high as 85% sparkling rosé and white wine, only 15% red in the summer, which is crazy.
And that will then change in the winter to...
Not quite parity. We sell a little bit more white wine all year round than red, but obviously red comes into its own in the cooler months. So,
yeah, when people want to be inside in the warm,
by a log fire.
By a log fire.
That's it.
Cuddled up with their bottle of whatever it happens to be, just enjoying life, so to speak.
That's it.
So you haven't always sold wine, though, have you? You have a career in alcohol, shall we describe it as?
Not actually in alcohol, although on occasion that may have been. I started behind a bar. 3 years behind a bar when I was at college. It helped me through that. That was in the early 80s. No jobs around, and decided to sort of move out of where I came from, which was Devon. There was not a lot of employment there. And I managed to get a job selling beer to bars as opposed to selling beer over a bar. And I worked happily in that industry for a long time, 22 years with, in the end, Scottish and Newcastle. But I started with Usher's Brewery, which was part of Grand Metropolitan Brewing, and I went into Courage Brewery. They got bought by Scottish and Newcastle. And I love that career. It was a fantastic job, great people, and great customers, some of which I still deal with today.
And that was just, I suppose, that's a stepping stone into what you now do, because it gave you the skills to be able to talk to a customer about what they could do rather than this is what we might do.
I don't think I could have run this company unless I'd had that grounding. Maybe not as long, but the good thing about working for a PLC was always that they gave you excellent training, and also cross-functional training as well. So there was an understanding of everybody else's role within the business. So I had weekly meetings with distribution, for example, and technical services and finance, and we were loaning money. So we had to be able to appraise things, but it gave you an all-round experience of what it needed to run a business in the on-trade, really.
And I suppose ultimately it's a bit like an entrepreneurship, isn't it? They teach you not the basics, but how to go about doing this so that you can then decide, okay, this is the right move for this particular pub, restaurant, whatever it happened to be, but then enable them to then go, okay, but these are the advantages for you in doing that. And you wouldn't have that training normally, would you?
No, not. And there's a big thing about mutuality and recommending things that you know are going to be good for your customers. And of course, it's going to be good for you because your customers are going to be more successful. And if your customer's successful, you're successful. So a lot of the advice that we give in Templar Wines is the hand-on-heart advice that we give, thinking, well, I think that's going to sell you more wine or be a better business or improve your reputation online or your social media standing. It's all about us all rubbing along together and improving our profiles, isn't it?
Yeah, and it is, and it's strange, isn't it? You look at it and go, okay, there is a particular wine, particular product, whatever it happens to be, and it applies to most business sectors. That you go, okay, just because that might be the right thing. Software is a good example. That there's software out there for absolutely everybody, and that software can be, I don't know, it could be Sage, it could be QuickBooks, it could be Xero, whatever it happens to be. But just because they believe it's the right software doesn't mean it's the right software for that business. And it's a bit like what you do in a way, and how we do it at Chorus, in that we look at what the client actually wants and go, okay, this is what we could do. So we could offer you this, or we could offer you that, or we could do the other. But actually, what's best for you is as follows. And it must be the same with the wine, isn't it? That's how you probably do it.
It is. We have before we even prepare a wine list, we have a good conversation with the owner, and maybe pull the chef in as well, and other key people if they've got a wine expert in there. We'll get them all together and just try and understand where this business is now and where it wants to be. And together we map out a wine list that can take them down that journey. Some accounts have got great chefs, but they're front of house. They don't feel that they can invest in the wine that much. So we have to have maybe a simpler list, better explanations on wine lists, more sessions with their staff. And of course, staff are the bugbear of the on-trade, because as I found 40 years ago, you couldn't get a mortgage working behind a bar. It didn't give you enough money. So we've got this transient sort of workforce that come in, get themselves through college, and then go and get their proper jobs and move on out of the industry probably. So it's a constant training.
Yeah, so and
developing role, really.
Yeah, but I guess that's not your challenge, but that's the challenge of the people you're supplying to, in that they end up getting to a point where they go, yeah, I've got this going the right way, everything's going the way I want it to go, I've got all my staff in place. And particularly, I suppose, summer months are a really good example of that they pull staff in for June to August, tend to be university people probably who have come back for the holidays and go, yeah, fine, I'll do that until August, then they disappear. And then they're left going, what do I do now?
If you've got a highly seasonal business, it's extremely challenging to get that continuity of staff. I'm not in that. It's understanding my customers are like that. Luckily, I'm not in that position, because I do run with capacity to make sure that our deliveries sort of always happen.
Yeah. And that's one of the things you've prided yourself on, isn't it? If to the extent that sometimes you look at it and go, well, hold on a minute, somebody's wrong. I might have a delivery day of X.
We operate in a tourist environment, and like I said, if it's a bank holiday, the sun shines, the stars align, we can get phenomenally busy, and people can get their orders wrong. And for some of our accounts, wine's extremely important, and we get the orders early, and some it's down the list, and you're chasing the orders and they forget. And let's not forget it. We're not rocket scientists here. We're not trying to keep planes in the air. We're just trying to keep places full of wine. And if people make mistakes, we try our utmost just to paper over those cracks, and we take their account looking at over the whole year. So, that involves a few emergency deliveries, mistakes, and a couple of picking errors on our part, probably going back twice, but we look at it in the round, and try and get to work together and not finger point.
Yeah, well, it's working with people as opposed to treating them as a number in it's a bit like a bank account, I suppose, isn't it? The common analogy that I use with a lot of times, especially with a bank these days, is that you're not a customer of a bank anymore. You're just a number within a process, and it doesn't matter if you're number 1 or you're number 3,236,000. You're just a number. It doesn't matter. And that's not how you run your business. You run your business based on the people. You run your business based on the customers and how they work.
No, and that goes right down to the phone system. We've got several lines coming in, but 9 times out of 10, unless it's out of hours, you'll get picked up by a human being, and they only have to say their name and their pub, and we know which one it is, or their name in the restaurant, and we know who it is. In fact, a lot of them we just know who it is because it comes up on the phone. Magic.
Software again.
Yeah, software. Yeah, so yeah.
But that's important, isn't it? And it's there for those things that set you apart from the competition. I know there's plenty of competition to sell wine, but there's one thing that you don't do. You just concentrate purely on the wine. You don't branch off into other things.
We've tried because when you're developing a business, before we were at the capacity we were, you're always thinking, what else could I put on the wagon that could be incremental margin and make it a little bit more profitable to go there. What's happened, certainly in the last 10 years, is specialists. And so, for example, the gin was quite a good example. Do we get involved with all the various gins? And you realise that, first of all, you then have to become almost like a mixologist to be able to train the staff on how to do that. You then have to have all the flavoured tonics, extra SKUs, stock keeping units in the warehouse where we're quite tight for space anyway. And actually, you then realise the throughput's quite low. So you don't get many repeat orders or bulk repeat orders. It's all little single pick things. And that just got in the way of us running a smooth wine operation. And it complicated it. We looked into coffee, the same reason, but that was, we didn't want to be baristas and experts on coffee making, but it's light, we can get it on the van, and that's why we haven't done that. So crisps, well, they take up a lot of space on the van. They're very light, so that was good, but the margin's very low, and the crisp companies do a great job. So, and cash and carry, so we've belligerently stuck with wine and tried to be the best we can to wine and be specialists there, and just understand where wine sits, I suppose, in the in the portfolio of products that our customers sell, whether that be food, whether it be soft drinks, whether it be non-alcoholic sector. That was another one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So we just try to be the wine experts for our clients.
Yeah. So. And I suppose one of the things that was a big change for you in supplying wine was Brexit. And whilst the initial, I would guess when it first happened, it was a bit like, oh, yeah, okay, right, okay.
But that's 2016.
Yeah.
They announced it. I can't believe it's 7 years ago.
And even now, there are times that you struggle with that process, but in bringing the wine from Europe, which is not exactly the other side of the world.
No, and that's been, we talked about inflation and things like that. I mean, transport costs have probably doubled, possibly even tripled in certain areas, and trying to get wine into the UK, increased admin. It took a while for post-Brexit for the transport companies to sort themselves out. If you recall, the dairy sector virtually stopped exporting dairy products, and that sort of transport was the stuff that was bringing wine in.
Yeah.
So nobody wanted to do a one-way trip with goods when they used to have a two-way trip and charge both ways. So immediately there was just extra costs, and hauliers actually exited the market. So again, it was just more cost and more aggravation getting it in, plus the extra paperwork, which is, for the uninitiated, it's about £40 per consignment coming in, and so coming out of Europe, and £40 pounds coming into the UK.
Yeah, so it's 80 quid.
So it's about £80 per consignment. Yeah. So that's all added to the cost. And if you remember, the perfect storm was that they delayed the Brexit deadline from Christmas by about 3 months. So we all stocked up, and then no, we had COVID, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I had to shut down for 3 months when I was holding the most stock we've ever held, and no one to sell it to because I only deal with restaurants. So that was a challenge.
And obviously, Brexit, but COVID in particular, changed the dynamic for everybody in business. Suddenly you went from a point that, and I remember coming here pretty much, or the day after it happened, because we were still, so as accountants, we were classed as, what was the word? Exempt workers, not exempt workers, but specialist workers, because we needed to keep.
So there's a joke there.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably is somewhere down the line, but it's probably best not to comment on it. But then it was about looking at ways of which to generate income. And one way in which you did it was to actually reach out to the local community.
Yeah, so we've got quite a large number of followers on social media. And obviously, I mean, everybody was furloughed. So it was just me in the office, sort of wondering how I was going to sell all this wine and no one to deliver it and no one to deliver it to. So I did. I don't hate the phrase reach out, but that's what we did, because it was us. It was community helping us rather than the other way around. Although apparently you couldn't get wine in supermarkets because they were all sold out, couldn't get the supply lines, had all fallen apart. So I did communicate to everybody that knew us that we had wine and you're welcome to pick it up. And it did keep me busy, and probably my mental health was safe just by interacting with people doing click and collect. The reality is we traded through COVID. Every time there was a full lockdown, we traded at 85% down on our normal figures.
Which is, and when you go, you look at what your turnover is, and you look at that and go, how much of a fall that meant. But it's not just the consequence of the fact that there's that fall. You've still got the cost. You've still got the cost of running your warehouse. Of furlough helped, but you've still got to then worry about your staff and go, well, are they going to come back? Are they not going to come back?
Were they going to move on? The vans, we had 4 vehicles. They were £2,000 a month just to finance agreements that we had in place. The mortgage on the building, the rent to the mortgage company, but everything needed to be dealt with, and we put sticking tape and plasters on everything in terms of asking people to asking for extensions to finance agreements and things like that. My clients, we didn't get a payment for ages. They were completely scared. It's a completely alien environment. So they held on to their money. All the direct debits just fell over through that. Thankfully, our suppliers were extremely good with us. We've dealt with most of them for a long time, but almost without exception, there was no pressure to pay. And we were in that sort of situation. I can't exactly remember how, but it was a good number of weeks. And then all of a sudden, the government issued grants to the on-trade, closed bases. And then bit by bit, they released cash back to us, and we released cash back. We didn't have to pay the VAT, if you remember. Yeah. That was deferred. And then, and there were sort of signs of recovery. What did take a long time was to recognise, that there were third parties that were affected by the on-trade lockdown that weren't covered by government support. And, we fell in with the, like the local fish merchants that just supplied all the fish restaurants, for example, or the foragers that supply all the fungi and mushrooms and microherbs to the restaurants, where their market had closed down. They had no source of income, but they weren't covered. Letters to MPs, conversations with MPs about, about the situation we were in. And I did have a 20-minute conversation with our MP, which I was grateful for. I felt he listened, but he was unable to take specific action with me because I understood that. And then finally we did get support through the extended rate relief.
Yeah, and in some ways that was a turning point, wasn't it? Because it was very much at that point going, how do I keep this going? Because
without that we probably wouldn't be here. I would say that just papered over all the. But what about this? But what about that? And bills that were coming out of nowhere.
And it was that process, wasn't it? It was the process of going from a point of my business is going forward. I know what I'm doing. I know how I'm doing this. This is all working well. To I can't do anything. And it was a case of getting from. I remember us talking fairly regularly about it's just get from there to there. So get from today for tomorrow. Okay, then the next day. Then it's a week. Then it's a month. And you had 3 other directors I seem to remember of local businesses that you kind of had your little support club, so to speak.
We set up a little support group and socially distanced, of course. Luckily I got a big mezzanine, and we just thrashed out between us what issues we were facing, different industries, but what issues we were facing, what we could do about it, again, it was the mental health thing as much as were there real answers. It was actually us having common problems and how we could get around them, and that was really beneficial.
And we often forget, don't we, that we run businesses, we support businesses, we do all of that stuff, but sometimes it's forgotten the stress, the toll that it takes on us, because you've not got anybody to go, can you help me with this? No, hold on a minute, I'm on my own. This is what I do. I'm a sole director. I'm a sole practitioner. Whatever it happens to be, I'm the owner. I'm in charge. I have to make the decisions. I can't go, look, can you help me with this?
Well, the buck stops with me, and we were close. Blimey, nobody had ever shut down an industry for 3 months before, unless it was a war. So in everybody's lifetime, it had never happened before. And you start to think, I owe 6 figures, more than 6 figures, how am I going to pay that back? What's my market going to look like? How are my customers faring? Because you couldn't get hold of them on the phone.
No.
Nobody was picking up, or not many. Are they going to open again? Was the account base that I had before and the volume I had before, am I going to get that again? Is it half of it? All the pipeline accounts that were about to open pre-lockdown, was their financing geared for that to sort of continue? You just didn't know. There was all these questions, and finally we came out of lockdown and opened up, and we were probably through about 70% of the account base, because some people couldn't reopen because of spatial distancing and things like that, staff and COVID itself. We probably traded 50% higher than the corresponding year off of 70% of the account base. It was helped by some fantastic weather as well. But we still ended up that year of COVID, we were closed 7 months out of the 12.
Yeah.
And it halved our overall annual turnover.
And then that turnover has slowly come back as
the second year of lockdown, the second lockdown, which was
20 March, December. So
2021.
Lockdown two was December to January 21, wasn't it? And then we had lockdown 3, which was pretty much January 22 until the end of April 22.
Yeah. So that, once that came out, 21, 21, when that happened, the next 12 months, we traded that individual 12 months. It wasn't apples on apples year on year, but it was, we were sort of 80% higher than the level we were before COVID. Literally, because the local card was played. We proved that we could get wine and distribute under difficult conditions. We had the stock levels. We had the stock in because obviously Brexit and things like that. So we had the stock. My staff were great in terms of being in touch and being empathetic with what was going on out there, and the phone didn't stop ringing. So we've actually come through it a bigger company, a stronger company. And I look back and if somebody had told me what had happened 5 years ago, you wouldn't believe it. Really, you wouldn't believe it.
No, I know. I remember very vividly sat there, and I remember sending a text to my team and going, right, you're not allowed into the office. Nice knowing you. See you at some point in the future. Keep safe, all of that stuff. And it wasn't until, I think that was a Monday, I seem to remember, Monday the 23rd of March, I seem to remember it was something like that. And it wasn't until the Friday that we got any announcement on anything in terms of sport. You sat going, oh, man, how are we physically going to do this? And then the support came, and then everything has then flowed from there. But I think in some ways that support not only got us through, but to a certain extent, has that led us to some of the challenges that we now face in terms of things like inflation, interest rates. Obviously, those things, whilst in some ways you do face those things in terms of inflationary price rises from winemakers, but it's then your customers that are then trying to go, right, I mean, I've got to get somebody through the door to buy the wine. Yeah,
and inflation's a difficult one. Obviously we're a wholesale merchant. I don't have a shop, which attract a higher margin. I am wholesale. If it costs more money for the wine, if it costs more to transport it in, I've got to factor that in. I've got to pass that on, or else I won't be here. So we try. Yeah, I'm not like a supermarket. They've got thousands of SKUs and they can change the prices every week. I have this relationship with my clients where we have to draw a line in the sand and say, right, we're going to supply you X amount for the next 6, 8, usually it's 12 months, to be fair. It's always been 12 months until COVID. We recommend prices and agree prices mutually about what they'd like to sell them for. And we've got this, we sell at X, you sell at Y, and we're all going to be happy for the foreseeable future. Yeah. And that's the way it's always worked. Well, for the first time ever, we've been putting prices up every 6 months, or revising prices, to be fair, because some have come down, but not many. But we've been having to do that every 6 months because throw into the mix the pound collapsed, and my consignment of what I always quote my consignment from New Zealand, which the transport cost when I looked into it was £2,400 to get a container over. It ended up costing £5,700. The first time I imported from them, it cost. Well, I can only tell you that the second time I imported with them, the exchange rate alone was 40 pence a bottle. And 40 pence a bottle on a wholesale margin is a lot of the margin. And of course, we had contracts in place to maintain those prices. So that has been difficult. But the good news is that just the last sort of 3 months, the exchange rate has sort of stabilised from where it was in the middle of last year. But it is much higher. It's about 5 points.
Yeah.
which is sometimes the margin.
Yeah.
You know?
And it sounds like a really small number, but for a wholesale business, that can make the difference between a profit and a loss.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you just and the bit that goes by the wayside is, whilst we talk about everybody wants stability and they want this and they want that and they want the other, when somebody stands up and just makes some statements, sits down and everybody looks at each other and goes, what just happened?
No.
And the day after the world falls apart, that has massive consequences to business, because business relies on stability. It relies on being able to plan and go forward.
And it's crazy. We said that we opened and we were, like sold double one month and the corresponding month pre-COVID. The implications of that on my business is that obviously I'm using my stock a lot quicker, so I have to hold more stock. And as soon as I grow at a rate higher than my margin, I start over trading.
Yeah.
So there was. I think we had a good year at one point, but it was, but it wasn't in the bank account. It was in the bonded warehouse. We had a good year because we just had to hold so much stock. So it just mopped up all the cash in the business, and we just had it in stock that year.
And it's a constant discussion that I know I have with you, that I sit there and go, okay, right, you've done this, you've done that, you've done the other, and we talk through the numbers, and then the question is always at the end, okay, right, what are you going to do about stock? And ultimately, a construction business, for instance, will end up with being work in progress because it just never gets built out, because it's just this constant cycle of going through. And in some ways, that's where you're at, isn't it? It's you constantly are reinvesting
in stock
in your product.
We're constantly looking for the next big wine, so there's an element of skill and judgment and luck in being well placed to capitalize on the next big wine. And
that might not necessarily be.
You're going to ask me what it is, aren't you?
Well, but your net, if that's the right way of describing it, is no longer just Europe, is it? So trying to look for that wine.
No, we do look worldwide, but being realistic, it's very difficult to import, for example, from South America and Australia. Wide ranges of wine is just, you can imagine there's big sellers and smaller sellers, and when you take 40, 50, 60, 70,000 pounds worth of wine in, it's always going to be the small sellers that run out first. And then are you prepared to buy another 70,000 pounds for the continuity of supply? And it's so I tend to work with experts on that, i.e. experts that are willing to risk their own money, not mine, to do that. And they're very good at it. And we have to be sympathetic with them when they get it wrong, because it's not an exact science. I go back to COVID when nobody predicted that the on trade would be up, because it wasn't just us. The whole trade was up. And nobody predicted that everybody would be so busy, and nobody had the foresight, shall I say, or kahunas, to actually say we'll order twice as much as last year, because so you had this feast and famine. As wine came in, everybody piled on. They'd run out of theirs, so everybody else piled on to the available wine, and literally everything was being mopped up as it came in. So I think we say that that year, every one of my customers had all 5 of our New Zealand Sauvignons. Because no one could keep the supply chain rolling.
No, and it becomes that big challenge, doesn't it? That you commit to the supply, but you then end up with challenges that are beyond your control. Be that the container ship decides to go around in a circle, or decides to go through the Panama Canal and stuff happen and get stuck, or whatever it happens to be. And those things are all beyond your control.
Oh, if it wasn't that, it was remember the glass shortage, and then the industrial action in Argentina was one.
Yeah.
Then somebody wedged a boat in the Suez Canal.
Yeah. Don't recommend that.
No.
That's not a great idea.
So all sorts of things were happening that again, you just think, God, I wouldn't have predicted that. So it's and thankfully, I think the industry is a better place to operate in, because before it was, if we shorted somebody of wine, it was a real major issue. We've now have a policy that we always recommend a substitute. If we haven't got a substitute, we buy one in, and we charge the original price of the contracted product. And that is an investment. It is expensive to do, but it's the right thing to do, because that saves my customers having to run around looking for a similar wine about the same price that they can do it. So we're trying to offer a solution to cover the problem. And like I said earlier, we're not flying jets. No one's going to die because I've run out of the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc they normally drink. If we've got one to our best ability that's similar and for the same price, it should get you through.
Yeah, and it's about that continuity of supply, isn't it? It's been able to be say, look,
it's a bit like the butcher saying, "So I haven't got rump steak. Can you do ribeye?"
Or tomahawk, or what it happens to be.
In a whiny way, that's what we've done. And thankfully, actually, we've now adopted that as a way that if we do get caught short, that's what we do. We offer a reasonable substitute.
Yeah, and people accept that, don't they? Because they go, "You've done the best that you can do in the circumstances." We understand the pressures. Maybe it's the wrong choice of words, but the constraints that you are under, and therefore, look, we're happy to accept that because it's of a similar quality, it's a similar juice, and people go, "Yeah, okay, right. Well, it's just a different label, all right, okay."
Yeah, well, and usually it's a different wine completely. So although we are running at the moment with the German label for our French house wine,
okay,
but that seems to work. It's not in German. you don't have
a language problem.
You don't have a Weiss des Weisses.
Okay.
No, we have Blanc de Blanc from Germany. It's but that's work. It has worked, and and we'll work with that supplier until basically the new UK approved label needs to be manufactured, and we'll just cut across to the new label. But we haven't done it before.
Every later school day.
Yeah. So there you go.
So obviously you've talked about the fact that there is a duty change. There is a duty change from the 1st of August, and obviously that's going to work through the system up until 2025. But what other things are then going to, or do you think will have big impacts on your business and the way that you conduct that over the next 2-3 years?
The one from our point of view, there's a number of things that you worry about. Do they keep me up at night? Is a moot point. But it is a lot of it is issues that my customers are facing. Recruiting good chefs and holding on to them is tough, and it is with social media now being on. As soon as they get a bad meal, you don't get 3 out of 5 reviews. They're either excellent or they won. So the one time that chef has a bad day, you don't know what's happened at home. People can have a bad day, but then to actually just become personal on social media isn't nice. If anybody's listening to the post on social media, that sort of thing, please just post reviews that are supportive. And if you've got an issue, don't put it on TripAdvisor. Why don't you have a word with the restaurant that you're actually eating in, and they'll do something about it. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, but
because they're only human.
Yeah, and things can go wrong, can't they? And
of course, they can go wrong.
And
I burnt my toast this morning. I didn't get a 1 out of 5 on TripAdvisor for my other half.
Now you've got less than that.
No, I cooked it again. And got a 5 out.
I got a 5 out of 5. Yeah. Yeah, is that the generation that's behind us, if that's the right choice of words, that they have decided that the way forward is I just put it on social media and forget about it because I'm not bothered, and don't understand the consequences of that action?
I just think the way that it's the generation that's been brought up on social media. I think it's here to stay. But I think the good businesses, if you read them, you want them to produce good food. You don't want them to be writing reams of justification in the general public's interest, apologising for something that happened that could have been done in 2 minutes, and taking nobody's time in the restaurant. So that's one of my worries about how many people want to be a chef when you're under that amount of scrutiny. If you make a mistake as an accountant, I'm not on accountant advisor, am I? Putting in my review. But I'm not, though. No, we have a chat, don't we? We have a chat and we move forward.
Yeah.
Which I think is the proper way to do it.
And that's certainly the way that I always approach a problem with any client. It's about having an honest conversation. We're human, and we don't always get it right. We get it right more than we get it wrong. But when we do get it wrong, we say, yeah, we've got it wrong, and this is what we're going to do about it.
Yeah.
And you have to hope, or I think we're in a fortunate position that social media and accountants, probably because we're accountants and social media probably has passed us by and we're not trained on that. But you have to hope that not hope, but we haven't been caught up in that bit yet. It's going to come in the fullness of time. It's bound to come because that's where the world seems to be moving at a greater rate of knots than I would even want to stand in the way of.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you asked me a question, what other factors are affecting the industry? We've obviously got inflation, and the knock-on cost of inflation is obviously wage inflation as well.
Yeah.
The government probably won't like me saying this, is that I'm going to continue to pay my staff according to what the inflation rate is, not what the interest rates are. I think the interest rate, controlling the current situation by interest rates, I think is quite divisive. And I know it worked at a certain time in the economy in the 80s, but I think we've moved through that, and having stable, low inflation has encouraged people that with money to invest to actually invest it, not stick it in a bank account. They've made the money work for them.
Yeah.
And I think that taking that money out, and if you're an entrepreneur, do I just sit here on my pile of money and 5%, or I'm not satisfied with 0.5% and 1%. I want to actually invest that in business and generate an economy. And I think that's why they're wrong.
Yeah, and it's always struck me that the use of interest rates to try and tackle inflation, it's a one-trick pony that will either work or it won't. And you have to look and go, is that working? No. Right. Okay. So what's plan B?
Not
sure.
But who owes a lot of money? Generally, people that start in businesses or have just made a massive commitment.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, you're targeting the pain at the people that have borrowed a lot of money, are highly geared, but with time they would have paid it off, but you're just making it unaffordable to them. And they'll have no spare cash to actually invest in their business to actually make it work.
Yeah.
So I just think it's an old story, and we've moved on, and we should be like Japan and have negative interest rates for a period of time. But actually, I'm not saying negative, but I'm trying to be humorous and not succeeding. But I think having proper, steady, low interest rates is the way forward.
Yeah, but we touched on planning, and what business wants is business wants certainty. And the problem at the moment, it has absolutely no certainty. And in addition to that lack of certainty, that then spreads into other events, into the personal economy. It spreads wide and fast, and you're just going to end up buying more problems, if that's the right way. We talk ourselves into it. We talked ourselves into the last recession, arguably, where we kept saying it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad. Oh, look, it's bad. Who knew it was going to be bad? We thought it was.
And we just have the figures released for May, and actually we uptraded on last May, which was actually quite a good May from memory. So I know that's maybe in real terms or whatever, may not be in real terms, sorry, because obviously there's been some inflation, but just a bit,
yeah.
But we were going through a period of 18% inflation. I think there's been some big profiteering in a number of core areas, and I think we're waiting for those to come down. I think the shipping prices are horrendous in terms of what they were, and they've incurred very little extra cost other than fuel, which is coming down. And hopefully energy costs come down a little bit, pro rata, because it does need to relax. Again, if you've got, there was a restaurant in local to me, I won't name the names, but their gas bill went up to £10,000 a month. So they're heating and gas. So it was a grill-based large restaurant, £10,000 a month. It's
Yeah. And then you go, okay, so how much do you have to put your prices up? You can't.
You can't recoup that. So they just closed. They closed. And they closed before they didn't have any money at all. They said, there's just no way that we can sustain that.
Wow.
And that was only 8 months ago.
Yeah, and that was probably the height of where prices were, wasn't it? And then it's come down slowly, but not massively.
Not massively. I have oil.
Yeah,
so in the countryside.
And you're outside.
But that was 98 pence a litre. That's the last week it was 57, I think. So it's come down quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing price-related things that are, where surcharges, for example, for energy was put on, or fuel surcharges. They haven't been coming down as quick.
No, and I know on some invoices you still see fuel sites when fuel went through the roof. Probably 3 or 4 years ago now. Those fuel surcharges that were being charged at that point don't ever seem to have disappeared from being charged from that point, even though the fuel went down. But that's probably just a byfact of the fact people go, oh, I've charged it, so I'll keep charging it. And
is it baked in inflation? Whereby actually I've put my prices up on the basis that I was paying more for energy. The energy's gone down. You've taken that and you think, oh, margin improvement. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, as a wholesaler that's on a small margin, sometimes they do go in my favour, but it goes the other way so many times. You've got to take it when it goes in your favour. Otherwise, you're just constant. You don't want to be fine tuning prices to margin all the time. People haven't got enough time for that. I haven't got enough time for it. To be fair, you want a degree of certainty and commitment, don't you? So
and it's about sending the right message to a customer as well, isn't it? Because if you were forever fine tuning that every single time that they place an order, they're going, okay, it's a different price. I think that's what's happening with fish and meat at the moment. That you just go, well, the price is not the same every day.
They don't want to be doing wine footsie with me. It's not like going down the fish market or Smithfields. They want to. There's not much certainty.
Yeah.
Halibut's that's double the price this week. I wish I could put the Pinot Grigio up by double, on a ad hoc basis, but it's just never going to happen, is it? It's never going to happen. Sorry, we didn't catch any Pinot Grigio this week. The price is tripled. Lovely.
It's just not going to be that way, is it?
No. So that's understanding what I do and understanding what my customers do. It's very difficult to put a plated set of food on that's costed. Yeah. And I know that opening a bottle of wine is quite simple in some people's eyes, but it actually helps support how damn difficult it is to put a decent plate of food on the table.
Yeah, it's that whole package, isn't it, coming together that makes.
Yeah, and my responsibility, it's just got to be better than what they drink at home. That's what we do. We won't. They're paying a pretty penny for the wine, so it's got to deliver.
Yeah.
It's got to be recognisable as what it is, and actually at the top end of the scale of what they normally have. So that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
So that's what we try to do.
So if you were the max of today, obviously 21, again, or so I'm told. But obviously, if you were going to go back in time and advise Max at 21, what would you tell him now that you've learned over the course of your?
I'd say, is it a 2-part question or 1-part question?
As many parts as you would like.
There's loads of things. One is I wish I'd moved more often. Right, I love my history of the brewery, but I turned down some offers to go to different companies, and I should have taken those.
Okay.
I think I'd have got where I was quicker.
Right.
But I was always loyal to the people that they trained me, so they deserved a return in that investment. And I think that's a good one. If somebody invests in you, you should invest in them. In terms of where I am now, I mean, don't be afraid to change direction. If you remember, you might not remember, but this was set up as an internet company originally, and I had to change it after 8 months when we ran out of money.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to change strategic direction. It can pay off. And latterly, which probably was a learning point from COVID, and that is where I was chief cook, bottle washer, toilet cleaner, duster, everything, delivery boy, is you can remain busy but not drive the business forward. So don't busy yourself with things that you can pay for other people to do to the same standard as you can do. So hire it in. Don't try to do your own marketing unless you're cracking. Hire somebody in. Get a cleaner in because that was rubbish. So that's my other bit of advice. Don't do the stuff that other people could do.
It's good advice, isn't it? Because ultimately, why did you set up in business? Why did you set up to do what you're doing now? You set up to do it because you have a love of wine and want other people to experience that. Yeah,
and it's a lifestyle choice. It's a nice industry to be in. It's generally I deal with some really good people, hardworking people, and I like socializing, eating, and drinking it. So it's a nice sector to be in. It's a good sector to be in. Ultimately, the reason why I got into wine was a lifestyle choice. I was stretched over a lot of the UK for the last few years within the brewery, and I probably stood a better chance of grabbing a drink with someone in Manchester than in Bournemouth and Poole, and I lived in Bournemouth and Poole.
Yeah.
And I thought, where's this going to go? I have a great night out in Edinburgh or in Staines or in London, but I've got very little social network in Bournemouth and Poole where I live. And so one of the key things, it's not the whole thing, but it was let's have a social network. So I've got a friend network where I live.
Yeah. And that's important, isn't it? Because you talk about the COVID support and all that stuff, but it's what makes, we can't all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy or whatever the saying used to be.
It is a mental health thing, and I don't, and I'm not, I know there's a lot of things said about mental health, things like, but actually having a good broad selection of friends near where you live that you can rely on is really, really positive.
So thank you, Max. That's been really informative and great. If people want to find you, what's the best way of finding you? Social media?
Oh, we're Templar Wines on Instagram, Templar Wines on Facebook, and website www.templarwines.net if you want to buy something.
So I hope you enjoyed today. Whatever platform you're looking on, be that audio, be that video, whatever it happens to be. Thank you to Max. Please like, share, subscribe, follow Facebook, Instagram, all of that stuff, as well as liking and subscribing to our channel. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.